Cryptos are entering one of the biggest opportunities we have seen this bull market. Now, if you missed the low, you missed the next bottom in September, this period up until the halving looks like it could be the biggest opportunity that you get for altcoins. Don't be afraid if you've missed this opportunity again. There will be more altcoins, but the game gets far more difficult later as the cycle progresses. Now, I'm talking about the biggest opportunity for cryptos and Bitcoin, but of course, we need to combine this with the macro cycle, with the traditional markets. And I want to break that down for you super simply in today's video, as you have reached your home of macro cycle analysis, where we study the past to forecast the future. We bring together all of the markets nice and simply for you guys so that you can get a holistic view of the world around us in the financial space and put this together for your own plans. Now, if you want to learn more about becoming an investor and a trader, check out the link, top of the video description. It's a free TIA crypto and economic report. We don't just cover the altcoins and then fade into the night when the bear market returns. We cover all of the markets because that is what we do full time and have been doing it for many, many years now. So let's kick it off with some data on the traditional markets. After you hit that like and subscribe button, let's pump this channel to 400,000 in 2024 so more people can see how these markets work following the cycles. All right, we have a lot of numbers here, but we're going to break this down really, really simply. So we're looking for patterns here. We're looking for how the cycles progress once something has already happened. And what that trigger is, in this case, is the percentage returns from the lows. So this is actually 2022, not 2023. Seth is usually on the ball here. Just a little typo, 35% from the October low of 2022. So we're up 40.5. So it's exceeded the 35%. So when that happens, typically, and in these cases, 100% of the time, we don't like to say 100%, eventually there won't be one, but let's go with the data here. 100% of the time, there has been a positive result on the S&P 6 months later. Let's look out to 12 months. You got the 1 year here, S&P 500 index. Once we've seen 35% increase from those low points or the gain there in that period, 1 year later, 93% of the time, there has been a positive result. Looking at the Dow Jones, 1 year later, from the trigger, 94% of the time, the market has been up. And for the NASDAQ, 1 year later, the market is up 88% of the time. So when we look at the data, the NASDAQ, the Dow Jones, the S&P 500, typically 1 year later, the market will be up. So when we look forward to the end of 2024, the data suggests that these markets are going to be higher. That also suggests that there is going to be more money flowing into the financial markets. And when we have seen new all-time highs for the S&P, for the NASDAQ, for Dow Jones, or even just big, fresh highs, we typically see that money flow into Bitcoin and cryptos as well. And when they're at these extreme levels, when we're getting towards the end of cycles, things start to get crazy, as we have seen previously throughout the teens and the 2020s so far. So we have a lot to look forward to. It looks like this is the biggest opportunity, even though the markets have begun to correct. The markets, in this case, Bitcoin and cryptos, as we'll look at on the charts. So just using the facts and the data from those charts, not my opinion, just what the charts are saying. The S&P has hit a new fresh all-time high. And in fact, it has done 3 consecutive weeks of new all-time high weekly closes, week after week after week. Now, eventually, yes, there's going to be some sort of correction. We will look to the 50% levels, wherever that potential top comes in, just like we have done in the past, lows to highs, and we check to see where the market could come back for a healthy correction and still remain strong. Essentially, when it happens above the 50% level, as you can see here from the July to that October low, it remained strong and then bounced away from that point. Remember, this was not there when we were looking at the low to be forming in September and October of 2023. We got the low, market has gone absolutely chaotic to the upside since that point. So we've hit a new fresh all-time high. We're in this stage here, the Bitcoin accumulation, from what I've labeled the Bitcoin accumulation. And how I've defined this is from when Bitcoin hits a bottom until it breaks to a new fresh all-time high. So as you can see here for the accumulation stage, it was November 2022, that's the bottom. And essentially we're looking for a new all-time high sometime around, I would say, late quarter three, but as easy to talk about, we'll just call it quarter four, 2024. And that comes out in roughly 9-ish months time. And that's when we go into this big gangbuster Bitcoin bull market. Now, before we get there, the S&P 500 in the previous 3 cycles has done this same thing. It's hit a new fresh all-time high. It's had a correction. It's tested again and then had another correction. I would say this is the bigger correction here. Obviously, COVID came into play. This was quite a small one here. So we had that run up, correction, market tested again to a new all-time high, correction. Go back to the previous cycle in 2015. So that was the start of the 2017 top. We had the new fresh all-time high. You can see the market had pretty significant sell-off. 2015 was a pretty scary year for the stock markets. Many weren't around at that time. Maybe you're one of them, you weren't following the markets then, but 2015 was a pretty scary time because the market really hadn't had any significant pullback since the GFC bottom. So people were still calling for mega collapses at that time. But now you can look back on it and think, what a bunch of fools looking at the market to collapse from that point. Just was not ready in the cycle. Anyway, looking at the new all-time high, we hit that. Correction. We hit another new all-time high. Smaller correction because essentially we're anticipating that the market is going to get bought up at higher prices because there is more money flooding in. The market is getting stronger, but you just have that pullback. After that second point, market went ballistic. Bitcoin bull market, S&P bull market. Real estate was doing reasonably well at that time too, and everything was going pretty crazy. I suspect this time is going to be one of the final times for this cycle. I would say is the final time for this cycle before we get a multi-year bear market. We haven't seen a multi-year bear market for Bitcoin. We haven't seen a multi-year bear market for the S&P. We haven't seen a multi-year bear market for real estate in many, many years since the GFC top in 2007, and for real estate was roughly around 2006. But let's continue on. The cycle before that, you had a new fresh all-time high in 2012. It's a new fresh high, then a correction, another new fresh high, correction, Bitcoin bull market 2013, market goes crazy. So the big thing to note here, the biggest opportunity, the crazy time will come when the stock market goes into a second all-time high. At least that's what this particular data is saying. Now, if things change, I will update you here on the channel. So make sure you hit the like and subscribe button so that you are following along this journey and you can cut out the noise that goes on elsewhere. So that's what we've seen in the previous cycles. We're there now. We hit that new fresh high. I suspect we're going to see some turbulent times over the next sort of 6 or so months as we lead into the election this year, roughly. Well, it is, of course, in November of 2024. But maybe we get that bit of front running into the market. As you can see, the market was running up June, July, and then into August 2016, had the pullback for August, September, October, bottomed in November, and then took off from November 2016. So maybe we get something similar 8 years later, which is now. So that's a look at the big picture coming up later this year. This time in this cycle. So we're in January, coming into February and March, which are typically periods where the market likes to find some sort of bottom. We had it last year. We had the March low, the banking crisis that was supposed to collapse everything. You guys remember here on the channel, we were talking about this as being probably the best buying opportunity that you will see in all of the markets because of how fearful that was. And we talked about it. We understood that because of the fear and how the market was then getting bought up at higher prices. That is your indicator. That's your signal to say the game is on. So we are now at the next stage. First test of the 50% level, and we've had the correction exactly to plan so far. So a lot of exacts are happening, but we still remain cautious that it doesn't have to be exact all the time. So we got the first hit here back in the previous cycle. The market took several weeks to continue to test the 50% level. You can see from the peak, you can see it coming about sort of 10 weeks later. It was still at the prices trying to test the 50%, and then had its pullback, another retest, and then the COVID drop, higher low, pretty significant, market moved away. There was another early test up here of the lower prices, then the second test of the 50%. So if we're somewhere around that timing of the halving and just after the halving, like what happened back in 2020, you can see it happened several weeks later after the halving that we got that second test of the 50% level. So that could happen sometime late quarter two, maybe into quarter three before the market starts to climb higher, break past the 50% finally, so break past 42, and then from that point, you'll never see prices under 40,000 again for this cycle. Now, for this period where we currently sit, I suspect we won't see prices under, call it around $30,000, barring any sort of liquidity, quick flash crashes to that price. I don't think we'll see Bitcoin trade under there for a long period of time where you could accumulate BTC under 30K. I suspect somewhere in the mid 30s would be probably best case scenario from where we currently are. Maybe even those high 30s would be the next best case. So mid to high 30s. Don't get greedy at this point because this is one of the best opportunities to be scooping up your Bitcoin and your degenerate 50x altcoins coming along the way. So we've seen this pattern play out previous cycle. We also saw it play out again in the cycle before that. So if things are going to change, let's continue to track it, but I suspect we'll probably be on some sort of similar playing field here where we test the 50%, we're having that pullback. How deep it is what I have talked about here. Mid to high 30s is pretty much my target, and then we'll come back to test the 50% again. And when we do, that will be the time where we basically break out of the 50%. You won't see Bitcoin under 40K again. Bitcoin would then attempt to go to the new all-time high price by the end of the year. This is a look at the Bitcoin bull markets broken down into 6-month periods. I posted about this in May of 2023, so about 8 months ago. And we were watching to see how Bitcoin responded in each of these periods. What we can see from here, basically that was May, we can see the market traded around in this range, started to run up towards the end of the range, and then we've started to have the pullback in the third. The third section, or the third 6 months of the 3-year bull market typically has a correction in it. You can see in the past we had the correction around the halving in the first cycle back here, or the 2016. You also had a correction at the beginning of the third. You had a run out in the third as well. You had another attempt at a run out in the 2019-2020 third section, another pullback, another attempt, and there's a tiny pullback, and then the market's basically on from that point. The halving also happens in and around the third 6 months of that entire period. So we're pretty much on track for what goes on in this third 6-month period of the 3-year bull market. The fourth, as I noted here about 8 months ago, that's the period that gets the most interesting because it's where the 50% is basically broken, like you can see in both of those cases as we were just looking at here. So back through here, and then also in the fourth, you get a test or very close to testing or even breaking the new all-time high. Essentially, the market gets very close to that. Bitcoin in this case gets very close to that or breaks it in the fourth 6-month period of the 3-year upstage in this current bull market cycle. Now, this won't always happen. We may get multi-year bear markets for Bitcoin. Multi-year just means we're not going to see 12 months down. Maybe we see 2 or 3 years down and then 1 year up. Eventually, I think that sort of scenario will happen, and then it'll take its time to recalibrate to the upside with the whole 2-3 years up, 1 year down. But eventually, we probably will break down to a multi-year bear market and then find its way to recalibrate to that bull market stage. That doesn't change the 4-year cycle. It is a count from the low to the low. If you're basing your analysis just off halvings, I think that's a surefire way to get destroyed in the market. Every halving brings a new all-time high. I don't think that's going to happen forever. Bitcoin's just closed the week under the 50% level. This is the 3rd week in a row now that we've closed under the 50% after testing it, breaking above, ETF ballisticness, and now the market's under it for 3 straight weeks. Can we close a week above? For sure, but the main thing here is the swing tops and swing bottoms. Now, what we've seen in the past as well, this is for the closing prices. You can see in the previous cycle, it really struggled to remain above the 50% level on a weekly close. You can see it tested it once, came back under, got it again, and then came back under that 50%. So in the current format, what the chart is saying, it seems like we might go through a similar process where we keep testing the 50% and they eventually fade out before the halving. And then as the halving comes around, Bitcoin finds its renewed strength and starts to test the underside of that 50% level again. So keep your eyes and ears and everything glued to the 50% level at $42,200. So the biggest opportunity is here. We're seeing the medium-term weakness come into BTC. That is spilling over into altcoins. We've obviously seen many of those correct 30, 40, 50%. Some of them are even down more than that. But I wouldn't let that deter us from the macro bull market, the macro altcoin season that I think is coming later in this year. Basically when things get absolutely crazy. We've had to have a bit of a sell-off period right now. Now it's a typical healthy correction. You must see those in markets to ensure that you're going to get an even bigger boom in the future. If things go straight up, they basically come straight down, and you basically don't get any time to accumulate. If you're not on the ride, that's it, it's over. And before you know it, you've missed out on the profits, markets come all the way back down. So the healthy corrections are exactly what we want. And Bitcoin has been doing that throughout this entire bull market. The bull market began, don't let anyone else tell you anything otherwise, the bull market began mid-November 2022. The bottom was November 2022. This market has now been up for 59 weeks, and I suspect we will get a higher price this year than 49,000. So I suspect this market is going to continue on. The bull market began at the low. The bear market began at the exact peak. That's a nice, easy, succinct way to understand markets, as opposed to trying to make up when they start and when they end, so that when we have a direct point, we can measure from them. Makes life so much easier. So we're measuring from tops to bottoms now to give us ideas of time frames. So that's why I'm saying this is the biggest opportunity, and I'll continue to spit it out day after day here on the channel. So make sure you hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. And to many of you guys that have hit the subscribe button, fantastic comments down below here. So thanks very much for dropping those. I'll try and reply to a few of them in each video, and just be able to summarize particular points. That's what your comments have been here. So I'll try and do that on each of the videos as well. So coming back to BTC, looking at the time frames, this move up, we know that Bitcoin has corrected roughly 20 to 22% on each of these corrections. There you can see 20%, and we've gone through this many, many times. Now, in terms of the time frames, the time corrections have been anywhere from roughly 3 weeks, like you could see back in February, into that March low of the banking crisis. It's a non-crisis when the markets are at new all-time highs, right? Then from 3 weeks to about 9 weeks. 9 weeks from April to June, 9 weeks from July to September. So if we look at 3 weeks, well, we're basically on the cusp of that now. If I just bring this out, bring it to 3 weeks, that would be this week. Maybe we see a low. I suspect from here, we might see a little bit of a push higher to test the 50% to the upside. If you remember from our WOF video last week, just looking at the low to the top, 50% was roughly around 43.5 up to about 44. Last point to supply, I'll get to that in just a moment, but we just want to keep a lookout on the time periods here. So if we take it out to around 8 to 9 weeks, that brings us into March, early to mid-March. Now, I've also got the halving date here. We go back about 7 odd weeks. That'll take us to early to mid-March as well, so 6 to 7 weeks. Now, why am I looking at 6 to 7 weeks back from the halving? Let's have a look at the previous cycle. The halving was May 11th, 2020, or the week beginning. Okay, so we go back 4 weeks. That was where the market had a little bit of a swing bottom and a pump up. But let's take it back to the COVID bottom. The COVID bottom was 9 weeks from the halving. The market basically went straight up from that point. But if you were around in March and April of 2020, this move to the upside, 90% of people did not think the market was going to rush to new fresh highs from that point. They all thought this was a dead cat bounce and the market was going to collapse again. That was how much fear was in the market at that time. And you can see the strength of that move, the strength of the bounce out, and then the consolidation, smart money buying, dumb money selling, and they continue to sell at this point while smart money was buying up even higher, not allowing that price to come back much. So there's the halving. I'm looking at 4 to 9 weeks. Somewhere in the middle brings you out about 6 or so weeks. So 6 to 7 weeks from that period. That's why we're looking at a potential 6 to 7 weeks from the halving. Brings us out to about that March date for a possible low or slightly higher low than any low that has been put in. What do I mean by that? And am I trying to cover all bases here? Well, kind of, because we are traders. But say we get a low this week or last week, then the market can bubble around a little bit of a dip and then start to work its way higher. That's what I'm anticipating, whether it's a higher low or the market starts to form a new low at that point there, and then we start to lead up into that halving. March is also a great time period for those bottoms. We had the banking crisis, as we've talked about. We had the COVID pandemic around that March period. We had March running up into this peak before the market collapsed from that point. March has typically been a reasonable turning point. Not every year, but some years it makes a significant turning point. So don't let that one slip by the radar. Now, if this biggest opportunity info wasn't enough, let's have a look at total 3 as well before we take a look at a WOF update. So total 3, total market caps excluding BTC and ETH. I've got the green rectangles here. I suspect this is the time frame that we are currently in. The time frames are basically all lining up so far, and I know I talk about that in every video where it's almost exactly to the time frames that we're looking at. It's so uncanny that it keeps happening. Nonetheless, I'm not going to complain because it just makes life so much easier. So from the cycle low to the breakout bar, roughly 23 months. 23 months from the cycle low, December 2022, brings us to November 2024. Guess what? How many things are culminating at the end of the year? We have the election. We have all sorts of stuff going on in terms of timeframes that bring us to that point where we could see some explosive action. So now, biggest opportunities are presenting themselves. Cryptos, altcoins, Bitcoin, I think there are some great opportunities here. So looking at this green square, we are now 3 months away from the halving, roughly 2.5 months. Last time that happened, we also had a turning point when we were about 3 months away from the halving. So we had the February top, maybe we get a January top this time around. Month and a half pullback, and then the market started to run into the halving again. So maybe we have that same sort of thing, except we don't have a collapse like COVID. I don't know how many times I've had to say that. People are expecting a big collapse, or they're thinking I'm saying a big collapse. No, I'm just saying a pullback, a correction. That was a correction. I suspect we'll see some sort of correction here, but this one looks like it's going to be a little more shallow than what we've had last time and the time before the COVID drop as well. We had a long accumulation, we'll have a shallow pullback, and then market will run into the halving, and we test those next previous levels. You can see the same thing happened last time. The market dropped from the bull market top into the swing bottom, the monthly swing bottom, ran up and then crashed through that bottom. Market dropped into that bottom, ran up, crashed through it, and again, the previous cycle found some resistance at that monthly swing bottom. So keep a lookout for when the market begins to run up, somewhere around that $580 to $600 billion on your total market cap, excluding Bitcoin and ETH. And we have the WOF Schematic. So we've looked at these as being last points of supply to the downside in this phase E. And last week, we also talked about, before this happened, before this market ran to the upside, the possibility of the market coming up to test some of the 50% levels. There it is, 43,800. So call it around 43.5 to 44. So we have broken straight through that previous level there, 50%, nicely done, 41K. So that's why we move this back to the top and have a look to see if we can get to that 43,800 level. Nonetheless, these were confirmed as last points of supply. The market broke down, you can see that happen. So that is all confirmed. We hit the phase E. Now we look to see whether we get a rejection and another pullback, or we start to see a rejection and a collapse through the low. Either way, I think the market is building up for some sort of accumulation over these coming 2 or so months. So that's the biggest opportunity that we have. I'm going to keep banging on about this day after day, showing you other data on how this is coming together from the traditional markets, as we had a look at earlier in the video, and the pushes to new fresh highs. Maybe we'll see some sort of corrections on the S&P, which give us the indicator that we're just looking for the market to cool down. Every time the S&P has pushed to new fresh highs, Bitcoin has gone on a pause, and this time has been no different. So we're going to keep watching this because this has been a pretty good indicator, reliable indicator, telling us what comes next in the cycle. Hit the subscribe button and like the content. Let me know, are you sharing this with a friend now? We want to smash 400,000 in 2024. Let more people see this in the cycle so that they don't get screwed in the coming cycle. Thanks again, guys, for your support and love. Hope you had a fantastic weekend. I'll see you at the next video. Until then, take care and peace out.